this disagreement here, right, about where the fetus is formed from. So there's this fascinating discussion in a sefer called Arvei Nachal, which is by Rabbi David Shlomo Abishitz, and this explanation is actually given on Parshas Truma, which just talks all about the building of the Mishkan and the contributions that the Jewish people gave to the Mishkan. And not to get it's long, very beautiful essay, sort of, but just to give sort of the basic point, which is connected to here, he says that there's sort of this parallel between Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, right? Olam means space, Shana means time, and Nefesh means the soul, the person. And he says that in all three of these realms, there's the heart. And in space, the Mishkan is like sort of the heart of the world, the center of the world. And when it comes to the Mishkan, right, there was sort of this reciprocal relationship between the Mishkan and the Jewish people, where the Jewish people would sort of bring their contributions to the Mishkan, and then through them sort of giving their contribution to the Mishkan would then sort of reciprocate and give them back this kedusha. And there was sort of this give and take of like them bringing their contribution to the Mishkan then giving them back this infusing them with this energy. And that's similar to the way physically the body, right? The heart is sort of in the center of the body, and the heart pumps blood to all the limbs of the body, and then that blood then circulates back to the heart again. And then he explains really beautifully there that this also parallels a person's spiritual life, that in the spiritual life, a person has sometimes things can start with the heart, right? Meaning like their service of Hashem can start with this sort of inspiration that their heart is triggered by something, and that then impacts the rest of the body, impacts their actions. And sometimes it works the other way around. Sometimes the person is able to start with doing something, and that then goes back and it influences the heart. And he says that's why the argument in this Gemara here is really saying that, right? It's saying like, where's the fetus formed from, right? Do we start from the heart, from the center, or do we start from another limb in the body? Which one comes first? And of course, the answer is really both, right? Sometimes it starts with that emotional inspiration, and that influences the rest of the body, it influences the person's actions, and sometimes it's the reverse. So yeah, just a little bit of like a symbolic understanding of that disagreement. It's not just about the biology. A little bit about this mitzvah of Leviah, right? This mitzvah of escorting someone, which we say that the elders have to sort of proclaim that they didn't allow this person who was murdered to not be escorted outside the city. So first of all, what is the mitzvah of Leviah? So there's a few different answers of like what that mitzvah is, and why that's like such a serious thing. So one of them is just like, very simply that the mitzvah of Leviah is to sort of escort someone outside the city, because we're assuming that it's a dangerous place, it's dangerous for the person to be traveling by themselves. So you're sort of kind of accompanying them, protecting them on their way. The Maharal says that it's not just a sort of physical protection, but it's also a spiritual protection. He says that, if you're not escorting the person outside the city, you're sort of like just letting them leave on their own, that sort of demonstrates a lack of consideration or care for the other person. And this is what the Maharal calls an ayin hara, right? Ayin hara doesn't just mean like being jealous of someone else, but even if you're just not expressing any care or consideration, then that spiritually makes them more susceptible to being harmed. And that's what makes you actually responsible for something that might happen to them, right? Even though you didn't actually directly cause them harm, but by sort of not showing any consideration for them and respect, and escorting them, you're making them more susceptible to harm, and that's why the via is necessary. Another, I guess, more psychological explanation is that if you're showing the person respect and by escorting them outside the city, then that psychologically gives them confidence, give them emotional strength to be able to just succeed on their journey, just like food, right? The two examples here are giving the person food and escorting them. Just like food, strengthens the physical body, the escorting them and giving them that, showing that care, strengthens them emotionally to be able to survive this journey. So that's why the elders of the elders are sort of expressing the fact that they gave this person, they weren't responsible. They took responsibility to give this person both of those things, both physical and spiritual strength. Now, of course, even though like even if the elders didn't do this, right? It doesn't mean they're actually causing this person's death, right? But sort of another way of looking at this proclamation that they're making is that, the leaders of the community sort of have a trickle down effect on the rest of the people, right? So one explanation for this is that, the elders of the city, if they, if they just did something so even as, seemingly benign, right, as just not escorting someone outside the city or not giving them food, right, something which seems to be not so significant, and showing even like a slightly less consideration for these guests, then the people who are a little bit less in a little bit of a less prominent position than them is going to do even less than that, right? And the people who are on a lower level will do even less than that until it filters down to the person who's on the most insensitive person in the community will end up actually committing murder, right? So the idea here is that even if they themselves aren't directly responsible for the harm that this person experienced, but because they're the leaders, they have this impact on the entire community, and whatever decisions they make or whatever like slight mistakes they make is going to have a trickle-down impact on everybody else. And the lowest people in that community, in that society, are going to end up doing something, committing an act such as murder. And actually, there's Alter Shapira. He actually explains this is why the elders are bringing the Egla Rufa, even though they're not guilty, right? They're making this proclamation that they didn't they're not responsible. They didn't let this person leave without food or escort, but this idea of them being the leaders and them taking responsibility anyway is very profound, right? Because the idea is that because they're the leaders of the community, even if they themselves aren't personally responsible, they should have davened and sort of prayed that something like this doesn't happen under their leadership. And because they didn't do that, that's why even if they did everything that they could in their power to make sure this doesn't happen, we're still sort of expecting them as leaders to have prayed that this doesn't happen under their leadership. Each mitzvah has its own unique, infinite power. And it's totally disconnected to any other mitzvahs the person did, right? It's not like, you get into a certain habit or into a certain routine and that becomes the value of your mitzvah. Each mitzvah sort of has a value in and of itself that's totally independent of anything else that was done in the past. And that's why we can make this comparison and say, this person whose life was cut short, could never actualize their potential with regard to those mitzvahs that he's going to do in the future, which have their own totally independent value.